Welcome back to the FreightWaves Global Supply Chain Week. This is Alan Adler, FreightWaves Detroit Bureau Chief, and I'm joined by Mark Duchesne, the head of global manufacturing for Nikola Corporation. Mark has an interesting background in manufacturing. He has been around, believe me, he's worked at Toyota for most of his career. He also has been at Byton, but more importantly, he contrasted the Toyota experience with Tesla, which, as we'll talk about, is one of the more interesting contrasts you can have in the manufacturing world. We'll talk to Mark about supply chain. We'll talk about the biggest project he's been working on, which is building a plant in the desert for the startup production for Nikola here in the U.S. Mark, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Alan.
Listen, I am thrilled to catch up with you again because we've talked before about some of the subjects we'll get into, but I want to start this discussion uh, really to talk. We'll frame it up against COVID. Aside from COVID-related delays, and everybody sort of dealt with those. What has presented the biggest challenge in getting the prototype tray models here into the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure you can phrase it as a COVID related issue, but the logistics world right now is super dynamic. It's had a huge impact. Everybody scrambled to get back, and then things have gone up and down and sideways. So, building a prototype model in itself is already, really dynamic. So trying to trying to schedule, a shipping of a truck the uh, from the prototype shop in Germany to the port, getting it loaded onto a ship, hitting the right scheduled date, then getting it to the U.S. and through customs, and then here to Phoenix. There's a multitude of different ways that can go wrong, but luckily we've got a really sharp logistics team here and in Germany, and so far so good. We've been able to get the trucks here on schedule and get them into testing and validation here in the U.S.
Yeah, I know that was a pretty big deal when that first one got here, and now you've got several of them. I guess I didn't do our audiences any favor by explaining that the Tray is a battery electric truck that you are doing in a joint venture in Germany um, uh, with Iveco, and then those trucks, of course, are coming here. That's a cab over model, which is kind of interesting because other than sort of medium duties, we don't see much of that in this country in the Class 8 level. But the decision to bring that truck here and to ultimately build it here was something that I guess resulted from some customer demand.
Yep. I think the cab over truck is um, it's going to make a revival. The new technology and the way a battery electric truck comes together will start to make cab overs a good choice again. I think, and I think that's certainly true in Europe, where we'll launch the European model soon. But in the U.S., it'll be a very distinctive truck you'll see going down the road.
It sure will. It sure will. Right now, it's all camouflaged, and that in itself makes it distinctive, right?
That's true.
Talk a little bit, if you would, Mark, about the kitting process. You're going to do sort of complete knockdowns and bring those trucks over here to build them. Talk a little bit about that, and also, if you can, the timing for when that really get going. Get going.
Yep. So it's we have a really unique, a great situation with Iveco as a partner. As you know, they've been building trucks in Europe for decades. So partnering with them, we're able to uh, get the truck in a kitted form, whereas the entire cab will be built at the Iveco plant in Spain. And then it'll be loaded onto a container, four cabs to a container, and shipped to us here. And then we will build the chassis from the ground up here in Coolidge, and they'll also do the same thing in Ulm, Germany. The difference is, though, that to ship a cab from Spain to Germany can be done on an open bed truck. It's not that difficult a problem. But to put it into a container is really quite challenging. There's only about an inch and a half of space on either side of the container when we load these cabs in. But we've done a lot of packaging work, and we're pretty confident in the way that we can do it. But the benefit it gives us, here is that we can start in a really reasonable fashion, which is we'll build the chassis, which is the part that contains really the secret sauce part of an EV truck, and that's the part that we're most involved in. Eventually, we'll move to industrializing the cab that's being built in Madrid, and we'll also build that here. But it allows us to focus early on doing the chassis bit and then just attaching the cab that's already pre-built. So it's a great arrangement for us.
Well, an inch and a half of space suggests that you should have either some newspaper or styrofoam or something in there to protect. I presume those are painted bodies that are coming over. Is that right?
Yeah, this is a fully painted, fully assembled body, so we have to take
Yeah.
a lot of care in doing it, in loading it and unloading it, and then we have to, of course, make sure we protect it on the way. But again, the benefit for us is that Iveco already does this. They ship trucks for this type of assembly all over the world to the smaller markets. So they have vast experience in how to do this and make sure that we get a good quality truck on this end.
Well, and what's interesting is that this is truly a transitional activity for you because you're building a plant in modules, I guess would be one way to put it. Phase one would be something that you would have for, to basically assemble the kits and to build your chassis. And then when you go to phase two and phase three of the plant in Coolidge, Arizona, you'll be able to do complete trucks. Talk a little bit, if you would, about how complicated this process is, and I'm assuming it is complicated, and where the advantages and disadvantages lie of doing what you're doing over here.
Yeah, I mean, complicated is, I don't know how complicated it is what we're doing, but, of course, it'd be easier to just build out an entire facility to the full size of what you want it to be with the full capability right from the start. But, we're a startup company. We don't have an endless supply of funds, and we're trying to be really quick moving. So, doing this in phases, it allows us to get a really fast start on actually building trucks here in Phoenix. But it also allows us to control the capital and only spend it when we actually need to. So that's really the multiple phase type approach. It's a little bit more difficult. We have to plan a little bit farther ahead. And your term is really good. It has to be modular almost. It also has to be really flexible. So it takes a little bit of additional engineering and conceptualizing up front to make sure that you don't build a monument that you can't work around later. But the benefit is that it's much easier to grow at a later point. So to do it in phases is really beneficial on a few different fronts.
Yeah. You've got a neighbor out there in Lucid Motors that is sort of doing the same thing or did the same thing, if I'm not mistaken. They finished recently their first phase and presumably are going to start doing some products. So you've got a bit of a model there for maybe not their model, but certainly something similar going on not too very far from you.
Yeah, I think you'll find that the majority of people that are doing this type of work right now, we're all following a similar model, and for very similar reasons, right? We want to have fast start, and we want to have controlled growth, and we also want to manage our capital spending as well.
Right. You've got two products really. You've got the tray, of course, but you've got the tray as a battery electric, and then you have a fuel cell model. Talk to me a little bit, or talk to us about what's happening with the fuel cell. I know you're going to make a couple of those this year, I believe. Is that right?
Yep, so we'll start prototype builds of the fuel cell this year, at the same time that we're actually doing the production trial builds of the battery electric vehicle. So the engineering design work is going on the fuel cells right now, and our prototype shop will start building prototypes in Europe, but we'll also start building prototypes here in the US as well, for this fuel cell project.
You had mentioned, I think, when at groundbreaking that you were doing sort of a trial plan or a prototype plan, or there's a bunch of different names for it. Is that pretty? When will that be up and running? That sort of test plant.
Yep, so that's what my team affectionately calls phase zero point 0.5. We took our phase one and we split it in half, and we said let's put up part of the building that we plan on putting up in phase one, and let's do it as quickly as we can, and so that we can actually start building trucks in 2021. So the first 270,000 square feet, which is our zero point 0.5 phase, the steel's going up right now, the roof's going on right now, they're pouring the concrete slabs. It should be, you know, fundamentally completed by May of this year. The assembly equipment is on its way to put in. We'll have that in place in May, and we're hoping to start building trucks in there this summer.
Mm, that's terrific. I was going to ask you about the construction progress. You just sort of covered that a little bit, but you really seem to have things on track now. And again, despite early appearances, because went months where people were flying drones over the desert and saying, where's the plant? Where's the plant? And of course, they don't, unless you're say in China, they don't come up overnight. And so I guess in one sense, getting your approvals for water and other things that you needed they were sort of supply chain issues, weren't they, in a sense?
Yeah, I mean, first to respond to your one comment, I also did a factory in China, and it doesn't come out of the ground any quicker in China either, despite what appearances are. Yeah, I mean, I have lots of experience with drones flying over my head while they're looking for work. And I wish for appearances' sake, I wish people that are concerned about appearances could really see the thousands of man hours of design engineering and development and all of the civil work that has to happen before you can actually look like something is going up out of the ground. There really is a limitless amount of work. But I'm really happy now that our appearances are easy to see. People can see a lot of stuff. That drone that flies over every once in a while has to go a little higher, or it might just hit the building. Um, yeah, I think the supply chain issues, everything you're dealing with in the beginning of putting up a plant, it is a supply chain issue, and my team works super close with the supply chain team that we have here. I mean, water, gas, electricity, everything you're doing in the beginning has to be negotiated. Vendors have to be found. You have to come to terms and conditions for all of those people, and then you've got to manage the project. So for me, I don't see it as any different than any supply chain type issue.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to go back. I'm sorry, I just kind of take you back for one moment to this idea of building in phases. What special challenges, if any, does that present to you and the team?
I mean, I think that the hard part is that there are some aspects of building. I'll use electricity as an example. You may want to build the building in phases, and you may want to build the capacity in phases, but you have to get your electricity right in the beginning. So the infrastructure part that you put in the very first phase has to be capable of providing through all the phases. So there's a lot of planning that goes in. There's a lot of advanced scheduling on how you're going to build so that you're not tearing everything apart later to try to go to the next phase. So I think getting the infrastructure right is probably the most complicated part of building in phases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you've got to basically put it there and then grow into it rather than come back and add later, is kind of what
That's
you're
right.
saying.
Building you can add later and process you can add later, but infrastructure is really difficult to add on to.
Yeah. And it's the thing that the drone just can't see.
That is very true.
Right. So let's talk about some of the polar opposites in your manufacturing career. You've talked about this, and I think the audience would love to hear a little bit about this from the Toyota perspective and then the Tesla's perspective. And I hope the folks at Byton will forgive us. We're not going to talk about them, but I'd love to hear again the story, sort of the contrast between those two types of effort and how you're able to apply that now to what you're doing at Nikola.
Yep, and I think what's really important is that uh, there is no right or wrong, and a lot of people try to make this distinction that if you do it the Toyota way, you're doing it wrong. and you look at that from a startup value, and then there's other people that look and say, oh, you do it the Tesla way, you're doing it wrong. Um, Both methods are suitable for the time when they have to be executed. So I think, I grew up in the Toyota world, and in my opinion, the Toyota manufacturing methods are the best in the world. But all big OEMs have great manufacturing methods, and they're time honored and proven with multiple projects. Um, and they have been tweaked over the years from the early days of Henry Ford. They've been tweaked with every new car and every new factory to the point where, there are a million different steps, and if you follow every one of them and you tick the box every step of the way, you almost have a guarantee of success. Uh, and if you have the time and the resources and the money, that's the right way to do things, to guarantee your success. If you're in a startup world, when you're trying to get your product out into the market and you're trying to, like I said previously, you're trying to control the amount of money that you spend, then you have to take a little bit different approach, and you have to try to figure out what are the absolute key most important things that I have to do to make sure that we don't have a really big problem. Some of them that you do, less of a check than you would in a big system, and it allows you to move quickly. It does put you at risk of making some mistakes, but you hope you have a very strong team that can manage their way through that way. It's quicker, much quicker than a traditional method, but certainly not as guaranteed proven. But that's how startups work, and I think it's as Tesla's proven, it can be work really successfully, and it can also cause some problems.
You used a word last time we talked. I ended up looking it up, and I'm not going to remember it now, but you will, which is basically the art of making things. Talk
Monos,
about that a little bit.
yeah,
What's that?
monozacuri. Um,
Monosakuri.
Probably my favorite word from my time at Toyota, and it kind of it speaks to my sort of feeling about manufacturing. And there's a lot of people that over the years have looked down on manufacturing, and um, thus manufacturing in the U.S. sort of had its years where it wasn't doing very well. It's making a comeback now as people realize that if you let other people do all of your manufacturing, then maybe that's not a good solution either. But Monozukuri, loosely translated, and maybe in my understanding, with apologies to my Japanese colleagues, is the art of making things. And when you apply that philosophy to, it doesn't matter if you're doing an intricate carving or a sculpture or building a car or a truck, it's an art, and the people who do it are artisans. They're not. You're not just putting parts on a truck. You're actually building something that is productive and beautiful, and from a technology standpoint, in our case, brilliant.
You also have talked about, and I think Elon Musk at Tesla talked about back in 2018 a process called manufacturing hell. Are you hitting that yet, or is that ahead of you or behind you at Nikola?
I hope it's not ahead of us. I'm gonna really hope it doesn't occur. I think if you know, philosophically, I'd like to think that you plan well enough that doesn't happen. And like I said, if you follow big traditional OEM ways of doing things, you probably don't go through manufacturing hell because because you've planned everything well enough and you've executed everything well enough and you've taken all the time that you need to take to ensure your success without going through manufacturing hell. Um, I guess the degree of manufacturing hell you go through is based on how much of the work and how many of those key critical components you you have made sure you didn't miss. So I would say that I'm hopeful we won't go through it, but I know that we will. And even the big OEMs, when they launch a new product, they won't use that term. But you're always going to have problems, and you're always going to have to solve them. And yeah, I lived the first version of manufacturing hell at Tesla, but You know what? It was also the best part of my career. For people who like to problem solve, it's a great time.
Yeah. Listen, I hope that you can, in fact, bloom in the desert. It sounds like you're starting to do that now. I'm really happy we could catch up today, and I hope the audience has enjoyed hearing from you. Thanks very much for your candor. Thanks very much for helping us understand where things are with Nikola in Coolidge and with your first U.S. plant. Thanks again for being here.
All right. Thanks for having me. It's been fun.